Good. All right, man. Good luck. Thanks. Hey, everybody. Sorry for a little bit of a late start. I am Andrew Hoppen, and I am a partner at New Amsterdam Ideas. We're a small Drupal firm up in New York City focused on open source for government, particularly state and local government, and we do almost exclusively Drupal, although we do some CiviCRM and CKAN, which is a platform I'll tell you about later. I'm going to talk about open data and why we think it's a big deal for Drupal in particular. It's a big deal in the US, and apologies for the slightly imperfect display setup here, but it's been a big deal in the US, particularly since 2009. As I'm sure most of you here in DC know, that Obama in his first month in office issued the Open Government Directive, which called on all federal agencies to be transparent, participatory, and collaborative. And that was a big deal for Drupal, obviously, because the Whitehouse.gov became Drupal at the time. At that time, I was the CIO of the New York State Senate, and we basically created our own version of the Open Government Directive. We had an incredibly dysfunctional at best, corrupt at worst legislature up in New York, and we used Drupal to help turn that around, really following the same federal precedent. And a lot of it revolved, we were building a website, we were using what people thought of as a content management system, Drupal, but we thought of it really from the get-go in 2009 as data. So when we put microsites online for every legislative committee, about 40 different lawmaking committees in New York State, we thought of all the information about what committees did, like where they were going to meet, what they were going to talk about, what resolutions passed, which senators were present, all those things as structured data. And so we always treated it like that within the context of Drupal, and that really served us extremely well because we were then able to make that data easily propagate to other systems and platforms such as mobile apps that we built later. So we've always thought of Drupal as being an open data publishing platform as well as a content management system. We, in fact, explicitly built an open data catalog. We rolled our own in Drupal 6 to do things like publish the payroll data that told people how much money I was paid. There was a long history in New York State legislature of no-show jobs where for patronage reasons, people get given a job, but they literally don't have to show up, and they get paid a lot of money. This made it a lot harder to do that because you could actually see who was supposed to be sitting in an office and how much they were getting paid. So again, open data catalog with Drupal really has been being done since 2009. I mentioned treating content as data as being important because of the need to have that data propagate to other systems and platforms. We built a Java-based legislative search tool called Open Legislation, which made it really easy to look up in near real time what was happening in terms of actually passing laws in the state, as well as the history of votes and all those sorts of things. We built that in Java, frankly, just because we had underutilized people with that skill set, but it was easy for us to share that data with the Drupal site, since it really needed to live in two places, again, because we thought of all this content as data from the get-go. So all this is sort of background on why I care about it and why I think it's great to do open data with Drupal. In New York State, we got a lot of success, a lot of awards, a lot of people down here, even in DC, saying, hey, it went great, it was an important thing, we did a good job. An important thing for the institution, though, and was not just about transparency, although that was our political mandate coming in. A big point of opening up the data of the Senate and using Drupal to do it was actually efficiencies of the workflows of the government. And Beth Novick, who helped to draft the Open Government Directive when she was deputy CTO in the White House in 2009, says one of her biggest regrets is that people focus too much on transparency. Not that transparency is not great and important, obviously it is, especially in an abjectly corrupt place like the New York State Senate, but really a lot of the point of opening up your data and sharing it effectively is to make government work better, to make it more efficient, to make it more participatory. And in fact, we found that inside the Senate, that we were able to get rid of old legacy systems that were managing data and simply replace them with sort of Drupal as being our data hub, because we thought of data as, we thought of content as data from the get-go. So the net of that was we were able to decommission a lot of legacy internal systems and replace them effectively with Drupal and save a lot of money in the bargain. Distributions, I'm just not sure how plugged in everybody is here, so just in case anybody's not, worldwide, literally just Drupal distributions, the concept of a version of Drupal, a configuration of Drupal that starts you out with a jump start to do something specific, are a huge deal in national governments around the world, and are really leading to Drupal becoming a market-leading CMS for public sector worldwide. And I mention that because we've now built a Drupal distribution called DKAN, which is explicitly intended to serve an open data publishing, open data platform function. And so the competition for this new Drupal distribution is primarily proprietary established software as a service vendor called Socrata, which I'm sure many of you have run into. It runs dozens, if not now hundreds, of government open data portals, including my home in New York City. And frankly, they do a great job, and they're great folks, so we have nothing against Socrata. Hunar is one that is widely deployed down in Latin America, again, a proprietary platform. And more recently, a platform called CKAN, which stands for I believe the Comprehensive Knowledge something network, is become the market leader in terms of open source open data publishing platforms. So if you go to Data.gov.uk or currently Data.gov here in the US, many of the other national open data portals have moved from Socrata to CKAN because it's open source. And if you're active in the Drupal community, you probably are conversant with the value propositions of why you might want to move to open source. And in really 2012 was, sorry?
What is it built on?
So CKAN is a Python-based platform, Pylon's framework, and Postgres is the database. So it's a full open source stack, but it's not the same stack as Drupal. And that's important to this community, and I'll get into why in a minute. In 2012, CKAN really broke out. For a long time, Data.gov.uk had been the reference example of CKAN, and it had a lot of market penetration in Europe, publicdata.eu, etc. But in 2012, it really became the global open source market leader with big deployments in the US, big deployments in Australia. We did one of the first ones actually ourselves in North America for the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. So we're big fans of this. And in particular, we're big fans of sites that integrated CKAN and Drupal, such as data.gov.uk, and I'll get into that in a moment. Just to review why we think this happened, I mean, it's the same open source arguments as you make with Drupal. No vendor lock-in, the ability to collaborate with your peers and lever off of each other's investments in open source. If you build a new feature in the White House, you should be able to take advantage of it in Australia, for example. Security transparency, obviously the ability to look under the hood, look at the code when you're dealing with data. A lot of the use of these open data platforms is not just for public open data portals, but for internal data sharing as well. So it's not just data that you might think is not quite as important to secure. Adherence to open formats and open standards. Obviously, open source platforms tend to have a better track record with that, although there's no reason proprietary platforms can't propagate open standards well. And then a big one from our standpoint, I think, is the freedom to host where you want. There are a lot of governments, especially with data, that have data jurisdiction concerns and really want to host within their political geography of their state or their country. Or for other reasons, like they happen to have a whole lot of systems administrators who are civil servants who the public employees unions care about, don't want to get fired, they still want to manage boxes internally. And whether you think that's a good idea or not a good idea, the reality is from a procurement standpoint, for a government technology buyer, these are all important considerations. So the ability to do all that, but also to have really enterprise grade, FISMA certified in the case of US commercial hosting options would be a big deal. Whereas in the case of a proprietary software as a service, you don't really have that range of options. So just to give you a little bit more sense of CKAN's reach, the open data portal and everywhere from the city of Buenos Aires to the government of Brazil, Australia, etc. So all that's great news. However, or great news if you're an open source zealot, as I am. However, one thing we kept finding is that when people deployed CKAN, they often needed to add Drupal to it, or another content management framework, WordPress, what have you. The reason for that is that when you publish data, the data by itself doesn't really do everything you might want to do with it. You want to be able to share it, you want to be able to augment it, you want to be able to give feedback on it, you want to be able to do all the things, frankly, that a good content management and content publishing platform can do, such as Drupal. So the reality is that a lot of governments are doing these mashups of CKAN and Drupal. Other governments still roll their own. Philadelphia, for example, uses another Python-based open data platform, which they developed. Was developed by a small company there called Asvasia. So with all that context, we decided to build DKAN. And why did we do that, even though there's this great open source platform, CKAN? Well, we did it because of everything we know and love about Drupal, particularly here in DC. The strength of the community, the range of hosting options, especially FSMA certified through companies like Acquia. In particular, the ability to extend it to do all these things that you might want to do with your data, and not to have to build that extended functionality, those modules, if you will, from scratch. And this is a big deal for content management. It's obviously also a big deal for data management. So what is data management? Well, it's actually not that different than content management. And this is one of the reasons we felt that we could do this viably with Drupal. Data sets are just collections of resources with descriptive metadata, right? Not very different than content you might publish. Resources are just files. We are plenty good at uploading and sharing and parsing files, whether CSVs or otherwise. Organizations, groups, roles and permissions around content authors and content owners. Very good at that, obviously, in Drupal. And then increasingly, we've seen a lot of work on data visualization in Drupal, including from some work done at federal agencies here, which is something that people obviously want to do a lot with open data. So DKAN is an effort to make it a feature-complete, feature-for-feature analog with CKAN, but to do it all in Drupal, so you don't have to do a mashup of Drupal and CKAN, but can really have your open data platform out of the box as a well-architected Drupal distribution. So it reuses some JavaScript components that CKAN also uses, in particular one called Recline, because they're platform agnostic. And beyond that, it's API. There's API interoperability, so if your data is hosted in CKAN or your data is hosted in DKAN, the data is highly portable between them, and programmers should be able to write one application that can look at either data catalog without a lot of rewriting. So that's what it is. It's an open project. It's up on Drupal.org. Its primary constituent components are a couple of new modules, the DKAN dataset module and the DKAN datastore module. The relevance of that is that you don't necessarily, if you want an open data platform built on Drupal, you don't necessarily just have to take DKAN and start with what we think a good looking or what the analog of CKAN is as a good open data portal. You could instead take a module and plug it into an existing Drupal website or even into another Drupal distribution if you want to add data publishing and data management features to that website. And that really underscores one of the really powerful reasons why we did this. We think that there shouldn't necessarily be a data publishing silo over here and a content publishing silo over there and a document management silo over here and a workflow silo over here. We really want to be able to do these things in a way that is really nuanced and specific to each local customer's specific localized needs. And in some cases that looks more like a website, and maybe in some cases that's really a site that's focused on search as the main user story. In another case, that may be a very traditional data catalog where people want to browse hierarchically through data sets. In another case, it may be really a storytelling website, a set of data visualizations, but where you want to have the underlying data be something that users could then drill into if they really cared to go to that original source. DKAN and Drupal gives you that full range of flexibility to build a website that's really customized to your needs, but to be doing it in a way that is aligned with the standards that are being propagated by the leading platforms in the world for open data. I'm not going to do a live demo because live demos are dangerous, but you can go to getdkan.com and find it easily and do it yourself if you'd like. Long story short, this is exactly what the CKAN demo looks like, and that's intentional to sort of show people that it is the same thing. The homepage, landing page are completely different across different data portals. It's one of the things people like to customize highly. We, partly because we're a Drupal shop, but partly because Drupal is good at this, I have a lot easier time customizing DKAN's look and feel and theming it than we did CKAN. We also support CKAN, but frankly, it takes us about 3 times as long to theme CKAN as it does DKAN, which is one of the great value propositions of it for us. Very simple workflows. You upload a data set. There's a flow for creating a data set, adding data to that data set. individual resources, like individual CSV files underneath a set of data, adding metadata, publishing it, setting roles and permissions for access to that data, etc. When you search on a data set and you find a data set, you get a list of data based on keyword. You can do full keyword search through Solr within the data set itself, as well as within the descriptive metadata about the data set. Once you find a data set that you're interested in, you have a nice display of all the metadata that is associated with it. The way that it's organized, it's easy to share it. There's metadata like license that's easy to discover. You can look hierarchically at how it's organized. You can tag it, etc. All the things that you might expect. Breadcrumbs for how it's organized. And then you can also preview the data in the browser, and this is done through the Rookline JavaScript component, where if you want to know what's in the data set to see if it's actually what you're looking for and it's actually interesting, it's far more efficient to be able to just open that preview up in a browser. So if you have rows and columns, you can look at what the data is and look within it, as well as filtering it to find data that you're looking for within a data set pretty efficiently. You can also do simple previews and simple graphs. This is leaflet-based mapping that shows you points if you've got spatial data in there. It has some nice clustering and other things that allow you actually to display a lot of points right within the browser. And all this is really exactly what CKAN does, but not having to use this Python-based piece of software to do it. Very good API, again, and aligned in terms of the standards and the way it's written with the CKAN API, so that from a developer standpoint, wants to make use of this data, doesn't really, for all intents and purposes, matter whether you're looking at a CKAN API or a DKAN API. A lot of people are already using the DKAN API to drive really custom data visualizations. So I think a very important use case is making the data really accessible to developers so that they can build apps that are very specific to very specific kinds of data. Like these data previews are quite generic. They're just showing you rows and columns and points. The previews or the data visualizations that really matter to a specific customer may be very nuanced, and so that's something that you can't build necessarily in a generic data visualization distribution because it's too custom, but you can make the API and the access to that data and the workflows for publishing that data really standard and really easy. So a couple of early adopters who were doing a great job with it. Civic Info in British Columbia is their nonprofit data management entity, quasi-governmental, is running DKAN and doing a great job. You can check that out. It's live. Data Wisconsin, one that's about to launch is Open Puerto Rico or Abre Puerto Rico. So there's some great early adopters. The city of Cologne is going live, I believe, next month over in Germany. And we're doing a lot of ongoing development on this. We have to keep up with the federal open data policies, even if we don't serve federal customers, and for our part, we're mostly focused on state and local. We still want to adhere to federal standards because in some sense, the federal open data policies and standards are a guide for all local governments, even outside of the US. So for example, in May, there's a new open data directive that came out that mandated adherence to a new standard called Data.json, for example, mandated the ability to comment or give feedback on data sets that hadn't previously been required. Obviously, things like adding feedback or commenting are easy in Drupal, so that's just, again, one example of it's trivial for us to add that to the distribution so that we can adhere to the federal open data policies and standards. Another thing we're doing is we're taking the constituent DKAN modules and adding them to other distributions. We have another distribution called Open Civic, which runs hackathons and app stores. So the National Day of Civic Hacking website, for example, that happened in June, hackforchange.org. Out of that experience, and that was built using our Open Civic distribution, we realized that people want to associate data sets with problem statements and hackathons because if you're going to build an app to do something, often, especially a civic app, without data that goes along with it, to make it, it can be, frankly, quite useless. So there's a really important use case for hackathons to be able to do a good job publishing data as well as a good job managing the sort of application development workflows at a hackathon. That was easy, again, because this is a modular set of Drupal components that can be added to other distributions. So we're doing that. A lot of people have gotten excited by how low we could drive the cost on DKAN at scale, in part because there's such great commoditized hosting partner options available, such as with the Acquias of the world. Unlike with CKAN, where you really have to fend for yourself in terms of hosting, and where there's a very small expert developer community, primarily out of the Open Knowledge Foundation, which is a nonprofit in the UK that is the core developers of CKAN. Obviously, you can go to any of hundreds or thousands of Drupal shops around the world to get help if you need it. And obviously, a lot of governments also have existing Drupal talent in-house. And you've got a range of hosting partners. You put all that together, and we believe that we can actually drive the cost and the technical complexity of doing a good job of standards-compliant open data publishing down low enough that any town or county in the country or in the world can afford to do it. And can afford to do it not in a bespoke sort of siloed way, but in a way that their data would be more likely to be able to be discovered and federated with data from their region, from their country, maybe from the world. And we think that there's a huge public benefit available out of that. And we think it's really the Drupal ecosystem, the Drupal community, and the Drupal module universe that make that possible. And we, of course, don't tend to do that all by ourselves, by definition, but we think we can really help move the ball on that. We're really excited about that as a company. So I'll leave it with that and open it up to questions. And I could also do a live demo if we run out of questions. So, yeah.
Real quick, I noticed that you're mainly doing this from uploaded files using file API kind of approach to sort of parsing those real time to show your graphs and the tables and whatnot. Is there any sort of, does this data have an option to come into Drupal as Attendees, as content inside of Drupal, individual row items being nodes in Drupal, for instance? Or is it mainly just focused on this file-based approach?
So, really good question. We've focused initially on the file-based approach because that's sort of where the market is, if you will, and the sort of the minimum bar and threshold and the typical workflow for publishing open data. But a big reason, again, to do it in Drupal is because there shouldn't be a hard line in our view between files and data sets and content, and so the ability to basically effectively create new data sets on the fly through the collaborative use of a website, for example, and then to treat those as data in the sort of traditional open data workflows or as content that is augmenting data sets is really great. And the ability to do universal search across what people think of as content, or what people think of as maps, or what people think of as data sets or files is a really powerful thing as well. And we're finding that again and again, people that are getting interested in DKAN we thought they'd be getting interested in it because they find Drupal easier to use than a Python-based piece of software which doesn't really have a large developer community. But a lot of people are getting interested in it because they want their website primarily, and they want to build a community primarily. They want to do all the social things that Drupal's good at primarily, but the data is a very important output of that, or potentially an input to that community and social process that's going on in their existing Drupal site. So we're learning as we go, and I think that flexibility and the ability not to have a hard line is a really important reason to do it. And a big contrast with what you can do with a hosted sort of third-party open data portal that is just an open data portal, even with a good API, and what you can do with a really full-featured web development framework. In this case, is really how I think of Drupal. Because you can really build a custom package that fits your specific use case in that way. So, yeah.
A couple questions. First, will you have the slide deck available somewhere where we can get to it?
Yep, I'll put it up in SlideShare right after.
And as sort of an extension to his question, is it mainly just CSV format, or are there other ingestion file formats that you're looking at, like SQL or anything like that? And also, continue to extend the question, like, can you import feeds into DKAN, things like that?
Yep, great question. So we're sort of knocking out file formats as we go. You can upload any typical format you want, PDF, doc, XLS, whatever. The parsing with Recline works best with CSV right now. We're adding support for Data.json. There is already DCAT support in terms of schema. We're adding support for shapefiles and KML and all the spatial data formats. This is sort of our issue queue as we go. I'd say we think of ourselves as sort of like a 0.8, not yet 1.0 release. And as we get a couple of more file formats in there, that's going to be the kind of thing that we'll put a stake in the ground around saying it's a 1.0 release. The good news is we don't sort of have to figure these things out ourselves. We're really just mimicking, again, what CKAN does, because they're fantastic and they do a great job sort of listening to the world of open data practitioners and looking at what file formats are most important to them. The previews is a bit of a thing. It's very powerful, but it's also very hard. If you want to be able to preview in browser very diverse types of files and data sets, it gets very hard and expensive to do that, and a lot of people's data doesn't look good, frankly, in the previews. We've kept that feature in there because it seems like it adds value to a lot of folks, but it often is also confusing for folks who upload a different file format and don't understand why they can't see their map. So that's an ongoing improvement process, and the Drupal.org issue queue on the project page, by the way, is quite active, and we encourage you to submit your issues and your wish lists, and as well as, of course, your patches. And it's really, truly a collaborative effort, not just ours. So, thanks. Yeah.
Hey, quick question. I think this looks really great, and I just want to explore more about CKAN, because it already does, I think, Solar.
Mm-hmm.
I've never used it. I just read it quickly.
Yep.
Uses Solar, uses Postgres, and I mean, Drupal supports, Postgres and abstraction, and it just seems like, I wonder what the thought process was when you guys decided to kind of mirror its functionality versus the ability to leverage more of what they do.
Sure, absolutely. So, first of all, I do leverage a lot of what they do, from the recline component to the schema and the API. And frankly, even the look and feel. We've leveraged so much that CKAN does, and this would have been a much, much heavier lift to do from scratch. So, full credit to the Open Knowledge Foundation and CKAN for making this possible. And in fact, the Open Knowledge Foundation is quite supportive of this effort, because they've experienced, for example, Data.gov.uk, one of their customers, spending significant 7 figures of budget to maintain this big national data portal that's CKAN and Drupal. And so the value proposition that we think is, especially when we can reduce the cost and the complexity of doing it by mimicking what they've already done, is that it's more extensible. It's easier to add things like new workflows. It's easier to add things like different roles and permissions around groups. It's easier to theme. There are a lot of reasons why you might want to do these things around the core open data publishing use cases, and that's why people like Data.gov.uk have added Drupal and CKAN together. However, if you can, the problem with that is that you then have to maintain 2 totally different pieces of software in parallel. One with Python skill set, one with PHP. You're not going to get an SLA from Acquia unless Todd changes this policy for CKAN, answering the 3 a.m. phone call when CKAN goes down on a Sunday. And that's a big deal for local governments to be able to avail themselves of that. And also, frankly, just it's a much bigger developer community. So if we can get a community of practice around open data publishing natively than Drupal, we're going to be able to get a lot of people making that better and better and better as a collaborative project, and perhaps put even more resources on it long term than the Open Knowledge Foundation is able to as like a 40-person organization. So it's really low cost to get up and running, and the single skill set and stack, ease of maintenance, and the diversity of the Drupal community that makes it worthwhile, we think. But it's a really good question. A lot of people come to us and say, well, CKAN already does this, it's open source, why are you doing this?
No, so I think we should convince the Open Knowledge Foundation to slowly refactor the code to PHP.
We have a lot of ongoing conversations with them about, not necessarily about PHP versus Python. I mean, more power to you if you've got a great Python team inside government. It's more about modular pieces that are interoperable. So it's great that Recline can be used in CKAN and DKAN, but CKAN's history was originally as really a data catalog, a data store, a good database to put data into, and an API. That was how it got started. And in my view, that's still what it should be. Instead, it started adding on all these content management-like functions, but a very limited set of them because it's had relatively little investment and relatively small developer community relative to Drupal. And so it's frankly not very good at those things. And it's hard to extend, it's hard to theme. The roadmap for that, the development of those features is difficult to figure out if you're not sitting in London with them. And frankly, that's just a much more transparent, well-governed, and high-velocity process in Drupal. So CKAN, in my view, if I could sort of wave a wand, would be good at the things it's good at, which is really the heavy lifting of data publishing and parsing, and making an API that is really accessible and useful to developers for a whole range of use cases of what they might want to do with the data, and leave the content management and publishing and sharing and visualization to other folks, not just us or not just Drupal, but be able to put these modular pieces together into a package that can be delivered as a hosted service, can be delivered as a custom solution, or what have you, anywhere in between. So, yeah.
So I've just looked in, surprised to see that using Search API instead of Apache Solr integration. Of course, I'm a little biased in this topic, but
Yeah, our dev branch is using Solr, and it's going to be part of the.
so you're switching to Apache Solr module?
Yeah, we are.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk to you about that at some point because developing more of the geo features integration is definitely something I'd love to do.
Great.
But
Yeah.
having collaborators is key to.
Yeah, so we're very actively working on geo features, by the way. Everything from looking at how we can actually point DKAN at a GeoNode backend data store. As you said, there's no reason you can't have Postgres be the backend. And it's just a huge use case. A lot of people are map first, just as they're mobile first these days. And it's something that I think, frankly, CKAN and DKAN today are a little bit behind the curve on and really need to get out front. And luckily, there's some great open platform work going on with spatial data map making and parsing today so that we can take advantage of. So we'd love to continue that conversation. Yeah. Sorry, can you speak up a little bit? Yep. Nope. So I'm sorry I wasn't clear on that. This is Drupal only. So we built a data store module, which is puts that data, uses MySQL as a data store, although you can also use Postgres or Mongo, or we've even tried it with Azure SQL tables. But you don't need anything from CKAN. This is really a complete standalone data publishing solution that